This conference this year in Durban, South Africa, we're thinking about thinking globally but acting locally. And that concept really ties into the research that we have come across. It's really important to research deaf interpreters and hearing interpreters and how they work together. And the research that we are using in this presentation is a result of an international conference that we observed. We'll keep this brief this morning and not go into the research in too much depth. We're going to be discussing the interaction between a deaf and a non-deaf interpreter. There are two different types of interpreting teams in this situation. And how the interpreters within the two teams support each other as a deaf interpreter with a hearing feed team and also non-deaf interpreter teams working together. We're not going to go too much in depth about the hearing interpreters supporting each other. We're really going to be focusing on the deaf and non-deaf team of interpreters working together. The deaf and non-deaf interpreting teams were using British Sign Language and American Sign Language. They were working from International Sign into BSL, British Sign Language, and also into ASL, American Sign Language. And we would just like to explain a little bit about the video process that we used to make our observations. How is it that interpreters make the decisions between the deaf and hearing teams? So what we did is we used video cameras on both of the interpreters. We used a ZI-8 Kodak camera. It has very good video and also good sound quality. The video was then downloaded onto a computer, and we used a software program known as ELAN to really analyze the data. The research really focuses on the decisions that were made during the interpreting process. And now I'll hand it over to Dr. Stone, who will really explain more in depth about the research that has taken place. Hello. Just as Deb was just talking, Dr. Russell was just talking about the international conference that we attended, and we had two teams of interpreters that we were observing. The deaf interpreters were working using a non-deaf interpreter feed going from ASL or BSL into International Sign. We're really going to be discussing about the accommodations, the affirmations, and the checking indicators that the interpreters used with each other. The letters NDI, just to inform you all, stand for non-deaf interpreter or hearing interpreter. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about the strategies used. First of all, the message was divided into chunks by the non-deaf interpreter. We also were analyzing how everyday sign language was accommodated to be given to the deaf interpreter, and also how affirmations were used to communicate during the interpretation process. I know these photos are not very clear and hard to see. But what we were trying to examine was how the interpreters signified the chunks of information that they were interpreting. First is an extended time hold of the sign. Second is the use of indices. And thirdly, often used was a hold of the initial letter of the fingerspelled word. For chunk indicators, pauses were used by the chunks were signified by the use of hands, either being held or dropped, according to the chunk of information. Oftentimes what the hearing interpreter would do would be to drop their hands to the lap or further down on their body to signify the end of a piece of information. And this is how the chunks were signified, by the drop of the hands. For example, the speaker is not making a pause at that moment, but the non-deaf interpreter has decided to have a pause at that point in time to signify the chunk of information. So here we have the non-deaf interpreters. The ASL is on the left-hand side, and the British Sign Language interpreter is on the right-hand side. And there are 3 different colors on here to signify the different types used. The extended sign, the index, the extended finger spelling, and so forth. As you can see here, the ASL users used all of the different kinds, whereas the BSL users used a lot more of different kinds of chunking. Oh, hang on, let me back up the slide for a second. As you can see, the non-deaf interpreter number 1 used 111 different types of chunks, whereas the second used less. They only used 86 chunk indicators. Interpreter number 1 used more chunks, implying that there were shorter chunks. And we had found out that the team 1, that they knew each other, they had worked together and were very experienced with working with each other. Whereas interpreter number 2 and the deaf interpreter working together had not had very much experience working together. And they seemed to use fewer chunks, implying longer sections of information before they were divided into chunks. And now we'll go into the accommodations made by the non-deaf interpreter for the hearing interpreter. Some of these were holds, which is an extension of the final hold position of the sign, and also a repetition. And chunks and holds, if they weren't able to, so too much information was coming very fast, the interpreter would have to make the decision to insert these chunks into the interpretation.
Yeah.
Head nods were often used as a way to let the interpreters know between the teams that the information was being carried across. The light green indicates the use of extended signs. And the dark green indicates that they used actually repetitions.